In 2024, I played quite a few games. Some of these were brand new releases, others have been on my backlog for years. Some of these became some of my favorite games of all time, while others, let's just say that I didn't like them that much. But in this video, I'm gonna talk about them. I'm gonna talk about most of the games that I played in 2024. I have them right here, most of them at least, because some of them are digital only. I hope the camera is picking it up nicely. But these are the games I'm going to be talking about, mostly in the order that I played them as well, kind of just to form a timeline of my 2024 gaming experiences. Unless I'm talking about the franchise, in that case I just put them back to back so I can kind of build on the things that I've been saying about the games before. Well, let's just get into it. I have a lot of games that I want to talk about, there's a lot to say, and there are also timestamps in the description and stuff, so if you don't care about a specific game, you can always just skip ahead to another one. But if you like this sort of content and if you like these types of games, be sure to check out my channel, maybe subscribe, leave a like on the video, leave a comment. Any support is greatly appreciated. But yeah, let's just get into it. Oh boy. We're starting this video off with a spicy one. Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, the remaster reunion. I'm looking to the side because my camera is a bit weird with it. You can see the game. Crisis Core. A lot of people really like Crisis Core, and if you are one of those people, then that's cool. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. But personally, I didn't really like it, and I don't really like a lot of the Final Fantasy VII compilation, to be honest. Instead of meaningfully expanding on this world and these characters, I feel like most of this compilation is just trying to overcomplicate things. They're trying to have massive moments and reveals all to one-up the original. They retcon their way into Final Fantasy VII, and they force this one game experience to kind of just become a franchise of its own. Final Fantasy VII was never meant to be a franchise when they first made it in 1997, and that's very apparent in the way that these side games forcefully introduce new plotlines and characters. Let's start off with the positives though. I like some of the Sephiroth stuff. They show more of his human side, and I like most of that. I also really like Cloud and Aerith, but I wish they had some more screen time. I always thought that the point of Crisis Core was to expand on Zack as a character, with a focus on the friendship between him and Cloud, and the relationship between him and Aerith. But while these moments are there, and they are pretty good, they're far from a focus, because what the game is mostly focused on is Angeal, Genesis, and then some other random characters like Hollander and the other guy, who are completely new characters to this series. And the writing in this game is kind of questionable, through some very awkward dialogue and just a lot of things that don't really make sense. So when it comes to creating original characters, you can already guess what the result is gonna be. And Angeal's whole thing was just kinda dumb in my opinion. He's the wielder of the Buster Sword, before he hands it down to Zack, who then hands it down to Cloud. Angeal is a man of honor, a man fueled by his dreams and his honor, and he will make sure that you know that, because every single time he is on screen, he will be mentioning this. But while they constantly bring up his honor and these dreams, they never really say what these dreams are, and they never really explore what his honor stands for. And in the moments that it is shown, it often doesn't really make sense. Like, Angeal's dad died while creating the Buster Sword, so to honor him, Angeal decides to never use the Buster Sword, because using the Buster Sword brings rust? What? At some point in the game, Angeal grows wings, and those wings make him abandon his honor. But this isn't really explored or talked about. It just comes down to he has wings now, and wings equals monsters, and monsters don't have honor. But don't you worry, because Zack mentions that Angeal's wings aren't monster wings, they're angel wings. That's the level that we're working with here, and that's all the depth that you're gonna find in this game. And then there's also Genesis, the main villain of this game, and another guy with wings, because just having Sephiroth apparently wasn't enough. For him, having wings also means that he's a monster, but he won't really talk about that, or he won't really talk about his motivations because he's too busy quoting Loveless every single time he's on screen. And he is on screen a lot, but even with all of the screen time, they fail to make him a compelling villain. He literally just shows up out of nowhere only to recite some random theater lines before fucking off and never elaborating on that again. A lot of his screen time also happens during Final Fantasy VII, by the way, like during the original game, because in that game sometimes they would just cut to black to show the passage of time, so they don't have to show the characters leaving a room, or so they don't have to show the journey that Cloud and Zack made to Midgar. And Crisis Core really just took the most out of these black screens, as in basically every single one of them, they say that Genesis was actually there. The scene in the Nibelheim reactor? Of course Genesis was there. The journey to Midgar that I mentioned? Well, Cloud may have been passed out in the passenger seat, but that didn't stop Zack from making a massive detour all across Midgar to fight Genesis. Oh yeah, and don't worry, I won't get into spoilers, but they also completely retconned the ending to Crisis Core, as that scene was actually in Final Fantasy VII, but they changed it completely in favor of this over-the-top super dramatic scene that, I kid you not, randomly cuts to a fan cam of Zack. And even outside of this, the game is written in such a strange way, where mysteries aren't really being set up through clues that leave the player speculating. No, they just have completely out-of-character moments, or they withhold crucial information, making it so that most of this game just doesn't really make sense, only for them to tell you that crucial information later on, and then they can act like it's a reveal. If it wasn't clear yet, I just really don't like this game, but the writing being this strange, I guess, does make it really funny and strangely entertaining. It does also get bonus points for being a good remaster, by the way. I didn't really like the original Crisis Core combat, which would constantly interrupt you with a slot machine, so I'm glad that they streamlined it and made it more fluent. The English voice acting is also kind of questionable, but that puts it on the same level as the writing, so I guess it works, doesn't it? Visual-wise, the game also got a nice upgrade with better character models, but the animations and everything are still very PSP, but it's a remaster, not a remake, so it's whatever. I'm not really criticizing it, I'm just mentioning it, I guess. Same thing with the mission structure being kind of strange. Next up, we have Alan Wake Remaster, a game that, despite its rough edges, I did really enjoy, because the story in this game is genuinely phenomenal. The game follows Alan Wake, a writer who has been experiencing writer's block, so he decided to rent a nice cabin on a lake in this small town so he can take some time off, relax, and maybe even start working on his next novel when he gets back home. Only for his wife to go missing, for him to wake up in a different side of town, the cabin that he was staying in apparently doesn't exist anymore, and there are all these weird shadow people everywhere attacking him. The way that this game builds up this mystery is really well done, especially once you find starting these novel pages lying around. These look like basic collectibles at first, as they're just items that you find while playing the game, but if you take the time to read these pages, you'll actually find out that they describe events from the game, detailing an encounter that you ran into earlier, or sometimes an encounter that has yet to happen. So you're basically playing through a story that has already been written, but Alan doesn't remember writing it. There's a lot more to this as well, with some fourth wall fuckery, but that's entering spoiler territory, so I'll leave that up to you to find out if you ever decide to play the game. The focus of the narrative is mainly on this plot point of the novel. Who wrote it, and how is this story influencing reality? Alan and his mental state throughout all of this is also a major focus, together with his wife. Where is she, and who or what took her? The town itself is also pretty central to the plot, with all of the major side characters being from this town. Throughout the game, you're also able to tune into a local radio show talking about the events of the story. They might mention how the police is getting involved, and then a few hours later you run into the police, and you even visit a radio station at some point. The town is really well realized, and it serves as the perfect backdrop for the story. I also really like the way that the narrative plays into the gameplay and the game structure. I mentioned the novel pages earlier, but you're also fighting enemies made out of darkness, so you fight them with both a flashlight to weaken them and with a gun to finish them off. But outside of this general concept, the gameplay is kind of whatever. It feels extremely PlayStation 3 in the worst way possible. The gameplay feels kind of aged and kind of clunky at times, and it isn't that satisfying. Most combat encounters also feel like a chore, and there are a lot of them. I really wish this game wasn't so action heavy. Smaller encounters work fine and can be enjoyable, but doing the boss battles or fighting waves of enemies is simply not that much fun. This game in a lot of ways is both a survival horror game, but also a third-person action shooter, and I just wish it leaned more towards the former. Persona 3 Reload. On the internet, this game has been a bit controversial from what I noticed, at least, but personally, I adore this game. Persona 3 has always been one of my favorite games of all time, and Reload absolutely does it justice. As a game on its own, Persona 3 has one of my favorite casts and narrative. I love the classic Persona thing of balancing dungeon gameplay with the daily life gameplay. I love how it explores these themes of life and death, and how that theme is present in every fiber of its being. It's the Persona game that defines the future of the franchise, where Persona 4 and 5 have a calendar system because that's just what Persona does. Persona 3 has a calendar system because they created it for this narrative, for this experience, and for every single moment to hit in the best way possible. And while the remake does lack in some aspects, it adds so much more in every other way. They added link episodes to explore specific characters even more in a meaningful way. These episodes and the normal social links are also fully voiced now, which adds so much characterization to all of them. The game also expanded on the life sim elements, giving you more to do and making the gameplay loop more interesting. The gameplay feel of Tartarus is also greatly improved thanks to the many new additions, with every block feeling unique thanks to the different layouts. Even the base combat got many improvements, with the Turgy attacks and the shifts bringing a nice extra layer of depth. The game is a bit too easy though, and it is a shame that they removed the tired or exhaustion mechanic and some other details. But despite some of those points, Persona 3 Reload is an absolutely fantastic game that you should play. And if you want to know my thoughts in more detail, I wrote a pretty big in-depth review earlier this year, which you can check out on my channel or in the description. But that wasn't it for Persona 3 content, as later in the year, they also released episode Aegis, The Answer. And this is an interesting one, as it's an epilogue to one of my favorite endings of anything, really, which is always a bit risky, isn't it? But personally, I think it does a great job at doing what it sets out to do. It gives us some more time with these characters, and it shows how they're dealing with the aftermath of the main story. One big criticism of this expansion, however, is the pacing. Earlier, I said that Persona combines slice of life gameplay with dungeon crawling, but the answer is basically just a dungeon crawler. There are some very small story segments throughout, but over the course of this 30-hour expansion, the story is only really prevalent in the first hour and the final 5 or so. In that massive middle section, you are just grinding the dungeon with a small cutscene every few hours. I'm keeping it vague here because talking about the answer without spoiling the base game is basically impossible, but I did want to mention it. If you played the base game and you enjoyed the dungeon, then this DLC is very worth it, as it's just more of that. But if you're tired of the dungeon gameplay, then I don't really think episode Aegis is for you. But in that case, I would recommend you watch the story online though, because while the pacing can be a bit odd, and while I don't think that it's a must, it is still a very nice addition to Persona 3. For the next game, I feel like I gotta come clean with my opinion on it. I made some videos on it pre-release, but I never talked about it after it's been released. And whenever the game came up, I've just been kind of hiding, I guess. I have talked about it here and there on my Twitter and my Blue Sky, but I haven't really talked about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. At some point, I am gonna make an in-depth video on this game, probably. But for now, this little section is gonna be it. Spoilers, I did not like it. Another very controversial opinion for this video, but it's an opinion, we don't have to agree. This isn't a personal attack to anyone, I just don't really like the game, and I'm gonna talk about my experience with it. The tagline for this game is "The unknown journey continues." That was kind of the whole marketing thing, and also what you would expect after Remake. Spoilers, but that game followed the OG for most of it, only expanding on basically every section and adding in the whispers. Until the end, of course, where it goes crazy and we fight Sephiroth, we fight Fate, we kill Fate, we see a different timeline or just a different something somewhere where Zack is alive. So we go into Rebirth expecting things to be different. It's an unknown journey, as the devs would say. But nothing about this journey is really that unknown, is it? They didn't commit to what the ending of Remake promised and instead just focused on retelling the story of the OG. On the surface at least. We're going from plot points to plot points, but outside of that, it's not really the OG at all. The game follows the path of that story, but it also feels like it doesn't really want to, as it will constantly distract you with new plotlines like the G-Tribe and this timeline livestream stuff with Zack. But these things kind of just show up for a few minutes, only for it to go back to the OG again. But with all of these elements already being introduced, it feels wrong for this game to just try and be a remake for so much of its runtime. Especially when a lot of these elements go completely against the point of Final Fantasy VII. The message of this Final Fantasy VII and of the original Final Fantasy VII are not even close to being the same thing, so why do we keep treading that same path? Why are we pretending for 80% of the runtime that this game is Final Fantasy VII? Why are we going to Gongaga or Nibelheim or whatever when this game obviously just wants to be its own thing? Especially because in its adaptation of the original story, it keeps missing the point of pivotal moments, arcs, and characters. Like, how can you have Cid without Rocket Town? Rocket Town is a part of the narrative. It's not just there because the writers just kind of put it there. It's there because that's where it belongs, to maintain the natural flow of everything, to introduce a main party member. But Rebirth decides to have the party member without Rocket Town. So as a result, Cid is just kind of a completely different character. He is there and they introduce him, but it's so different that it's not even close to being the thing that this game is trying to remake. It baffles me that I even have to say this, but yes, narrative arcs and their flow is vital to a story, and taking one of them out just to do it later has consequences. You can't just continue the story like the OG did, because you missed an arc. The game doesn't understand what made Final Fantasy VII so special to me, and because of that, it just creates a worse version of it. So many iconic moments that I was personally really looking forward to are either just not there, or they're altered so much to the point that I just don't like them anymore. Being stuck in the desert underneath the gold saucer, traversing this endless wasteland, being stuck with this feeling of despair as you're looking for Barret, well, Rebirth turns that into a little camp where you do mandatory side quests, such as catch the Cactuar. And if you look outside of the camp through the big open gate, you can see all of the open world activities right there waiting for you to explore. Or that magical feeling when you first leave Midgar. Midgar, for the first 5 hours or so of the OG, was all you knew. Midgar was the world of Final Fantasy VII. But then you step outside, you see the overworld, you traverse to the next town, and there's Calm, an entire community living within this really small, cozy town. It's in the name, it's a calm village, the complete opposite of Midgar. While in this game you obviously can't leave Midgar to get to the open world, as the game starts you in Calm as an effect of them making this into a trilogy. But Calm is also just this really big town now, with a million things to do and with a million side quests. It feels different from Midgar, but it doesn't feel like Calm. Even putting all comparisons aside, Rebirth as its own own no game. It's so hard to judge because the game very rarely tries to be its own thing. It tries, but it doesn't go far enough for it to actually have an impact on the narrative. I was still pretty on board during Remake, by the way. I have discussion videos on my channel where I talk about Rebirth pre-release, and I was excited. I was curious for this new direction. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one recreation at all. My dislike for the compilation had me worried, but I still had hopes. Hopes that it would be something interesting, something to continue that insane ending from Remake, which was my first exposure to Final Fantasy VII or just Final Fantasy as a whole. But they just don't really do that. Even during the ending of this game, they go insane, doing so much wacky stuff, only for it to mostly end up like the OG anyway, taking away from the impact of both the new and the original story elements, while setting up part 3 to just be more of the same. It's like they're scared to deviate too much from the original, so now it just sits awkwardly in the middle while they stretch out these 10 to 15 hours of story content into a massive and bloated 70-hour experience that feels at a loss of what it wants to be. While also having an open world that might be very fun to explore for some, but to me it just felt like a drag and it took away from many areas rather than adding to them. An open world just doesn't have the same sense of scale as an overworld, and even then, doing a combat challenge or a data point for Chadley isn't exactly on my list of things that I wanna engage with. For the positives though, the combat is really fun and the voice performances are flawless. I also love some smaller elements like the boss fight against Vincent, and yes, Queen's Blood is really fun. But as someone who really loves the OG, and as someone who enjoyed Remake, this game felt pointless to me. It tries to be different, but it doesn't commit. It tries to be faithful, but it misses the point. It goes against everything that Final Fantasy VII stands for, and it misses so much of what made that game so special to me. I honestly just wish that I didn't play it, because it's only now that I realize that this game, or this trilogy, just isn't for me. If you played this game and you found something to love, I am so happy for you. But I'm making this game talking about every game that I played in 2024, and sadly, this was one of them. NieR Reincarnation, or for the cultured among us, Erdtree. What a fucking game. Man, oh my god. Some people out there don't even know it exists. They're thinking like, oh, we got NieR Replicant, we got NieR Automata. Where is Erdtree? Oh sweet summer child, Erdtree has always been right here. On mobile devices for some reason. But not even that anymore, because NieR Reincarnation ended service in April of 2024, making it completely inaccessible, which is really sad to think about. And I honestly think about this game quite a bit. Like, yes, it is a gacha game, and yes, the gameplay wasn't all that, as I mostly just put it on auto battle, but the art and the music was incredible, and this game just had a story to tell. A story of a girl and a monster. A story of two siblings, and of an android that is protecting the final memories of humanity on the moon. 3 main story arcs, each focusing on one of these characters as they traverse this place known as the Cage. I do have to mention that I started playing NieR Reincarnation during the 2nd anniversary, if I remember correctly, which is where they started to be extremely generous, and that's when this game became extremely free-to-play friendly. Where before, I wasn't really planning on getting into it, it's a gacha game, probably pay to win, not interested, really. But it was the anniversary, I was able to clear the story mode without ever having to worry about anything. I didn't spend a single cent on this game. So that did affect my enjoyment. I can see that if you started this game on release, it was kind of a grind fest and maybe you didn't enjoy it that much. But I'm here to talk about the story experience. I just thought I'd mention it for full clarity. In the first arc of NieR Reincarnation, they do a really good job at just setting up the overarching mystery and just setting up the general plotline of this game. I also really enjoyed the plot of this arc in specific, with the girl and the monster, but a lot of the individual stories that you explore by accessing memories from distant worlds were kind of hit or miss. Some of them were incredible, but others were just kind of boring, even if they did cover the same themes to reflect the story of the girl and the monster. This is kind of just the structure of this game. You will have your main narrative with two main characters, and these characters are accessing memories from distant worlds. These stories then often tie into the story of these main characters, and like that you kind of have one overarching plot of NieR Reincarnation, you have the main plotline of your arc that you're in, and then you also have all of these mini plot lines that you're exploring that all come together for this greater narrative, and I really enjoyed that setup. And for the second arc, the main story was really starting to pick up speed. The first arc is mostly setup and you don't really know what the fuck is going on. It's a NieR game, I feel like we're used to that at this point. But even if I enjoyed the first arc, the second act really steps it up in every possible way. I absolutely loved the story of our new main characters, Yuzuki and Hina, and even the smaller stories that you get to explore feel a lot more in-depth. Not only did I enjoy them more in their own right, but they also have a greater connection to the main story of this game and the story of this chapter. But the final arc was without a doubt the best part of this entire experience. Every arc before this was just planting the seeds, and after years of build-up, I'm happy to say that NieR Reincarnation was able to bring everything together and concludes this experience in a super satisfying and surprising way. This entire chapter was filled with plot twists and crazy moments at every turn, and it was incredible to finally get answers to so many questions. Not just questions from this game, by the way, but from all of NieR and even Drakengard, as this game directly ties together everything that came before, while also laying a foundation for what is next in this franchise, and dropping some massive lore bombs along the way. But while it did a lot of heavy lifting for the greater story of this universe, it also manages to bring a satisfying conclusion on a more personal level to every character that we met throughout our journey in the cage. All of them get a time to shine in this final arc. I really don't want to get into spoilers, because if you are a fan of NieR, you owe it to yourself to watch the cutscenes, to read the story, or to beg Square Enix for a port, or even a translation of the novel, because this game shows us so much. It answers so many questions and it asks many more, all the while expanding on this world in such a way that my jaw was constantly dropped to the floor. It feels very strange to say this about a free-to-play gacha game, but as a fan of Drakengard and NieR, this game felt like something truly special, and it was one of my favorite experiences of 2024. Love it or hate it, this is Erdtree, and while I used to be on the hate side, I am so happy that I decided to check it out regardless, because as a fan of the series, this was a joy to experience. And we're gonna stay in this universe for a little while longer, because the next game that I played in 2024 was none other than Drakengard 3. This is a prequel to the entire series, set before Drakengard 1, which is in turn a prequel to NieR Replicant, which is in turn a prequel to NieR Automata. So this is chronologically the first NieR game, or Drakengard game, the first in the Yoko Taro universe to exist, I guess. And this game follows the story of Zero, together with her dragon Mikhail, as they hunt down the Intoners, Zero's sisters, but we don't know exactly why. We just know that Zero really wants to kill them for some reason. And this game is an experience like no other. And in so many ways, I would say that it is a downright masterpiece. The way that this game tells its story and how it strangely makes you care for these characters through the different routes and endings is something truly special. These are not characters that you would expect to like. Similarly to Drakengard 1, they're all pretty terrible people, but somehow they do get you to care for them. Where Drakengard 1 is often extremely serious about its subject matter though, Drakengard 3 kind of goes the complete opposite direction, often resorting to comedic bits, making fun of how batshit insane all of these characters in these situations are. But despite this, the comedy is handled in a way that you can still take this narrative seriously. The game is having a lot of fun with it, but it's still telling you this story, this deeply disturbing story even. It feels very real to these characters, and because of that you can still get emotionally invested in this narrative. And while you play through the game in a linear manner, it is also divided into multiple branches of the same timeline. Just like the recent NieR games, this game has a lot of endings, but these endings are just the end of a branch and not the end of a story. And all of these branches come together to give you small pieces of information on this world and this story. From the bigger picture overarching narrative stuff down to the self-contained story of Zero, the Intoners, and her servants. It's an extremely impactful narrative with a thematic through line that hits all of the emotional peaks that it needs to, and it does so in a way that can only be achieved within this medium, while also trying to break it. Yoko Taro often talks about wanting to break the boundaries of what is acceptable within gaming as a medium, and some segments in this game are a clear example of that. But talking about a medium, this is still a game, and while I absolutely adore everything about the story, it is a game that you have to play. And sadly, it's not that great to play. I still found myself having fun, and it's a major step up from the original Drakengard, but it feels very lacking. The level design is extremely repetitive, there are awkward difficulty jumps, it feels unbalanced with some weapons being completely useless, side content is just repetitive missions inside reused areas, your companions kind of just feel useless in battle, and I could go on, but in conclusion, it's just not that great to play, especially because on top of all of this, the game has a terrible performance with a lot of screen tearing, and you're lucky if you can hit 30 FPS for more than a few seconds. But despite all of these gameplay issues, I'm really happy that I played through it myself. I doubt that this game would have impacted me in this way if I just watched a playthrough. As I said, it really uses the medium of games, and unlike Drakengard 1, which I could not 100% complete at all, and I even had to watch the true ending on YouTube, I got the platinum for Drakengard 3, because even if it was kind of annoying to play, there was something to it, and I just really loved the game, so I wanted to show my dedication for it, I guess. You can call me an insane person if you want. This game is definitely not for everyone, but it is genuinely pretty fucking incredible, and for me personally, this experience stands incredibly strong even with all of its flaws. But the game that I played next definitely didn't suffer from any of those gameplay issues, because after that I played probably my favorite action game of 2024, Stellar Blade. And this is an absolutely beautiful game with a super fun and satisfying combat system and a really fun world to explore. But the story is a bit undercooked. It has some charming characters, some cool moments and great ideas, but not all of them are explored as much as they should have been, and it feels like this game is just building a foundation for something more. The narrative takes a backseat for the majority of the game, with the focus being more on the world building and the lore, which you explore through the exploration of the world and the side quests. Because of this, the world is really interesting and it serves as a great foundation, but the story told within that world just left me wanting more. It's clear that their focus was on creating a fun gameplay experience instead, and they definitely didn't disappoint in that regard. The combat is a satisfying level of challenging, the parries and dodges feel extremely satisfying, there's a good feeling of progression with some neat customization, and the skill tree is very diverse. The exploration also feels natural and rewarding, and the world doesn't feel bloated, with the linear dungeons being a nice change of pace for the gameplay. The atmosphere is also incredible as this game looks beautiful and the OST is on point. I do have more things to say about this game, but I'm gonna keep it very short for this video, because on my channel right now you can find a complete spoiler-free review of Stellar Blade, where I elaborate on all of these points and more. And the next game that I played was the original Final Fantasy IX for the PlayStation 1. I didn't play this version of it though. This is a fucking PS1 Japanese copy. I played the modern console port of it, but I have it physically, so I thought, why not show it? This game was just a joy to experience from beginning to end. It does a fantastic job at establishing the main cast and their dynamic. New characters are introduced naturally, and all of them felt like they had a place within the party, the narrative, and especially the core messaging of this game. And the way that this game flows from one narrative beat onto the next was incredibly well done, with every event and reveal leaving an impact in one way or another. Near the end, I do think you went a tiny bit fast fast and some characters could have been explored a tiny bit more, but these are pretty minor flaws next to all of the incredible stuff that this game has to offer. From a gameplay standpoint, it is a bit more hit or miss though. The way that the world opens up to you is done incredibly well and the exploration is really fun, but I didn't really vibe with the combat. It's really slow, to the point that it's kind of annoying. Trances, the special limit break kind of moves, aren't implemented that well, and the ability or equipment system just didn't really do it for me. There were points where I thought that I was finally getting used to the combat in this game, but it just never really clicked with me. And it's also not an age thing, as I did really like the combat from Final Fantasy VII, for example. That's my biggest issue with it though. If you can look past the combat speed, it's an incredible game. And just like with Stellar Blade, I already have a in-depth Final Fantasy IX review out on my channel, where I talk in a bit more detail about the things that I loved, and I also go more in-depth with my issues with the game, even if there aren't that many. So if you're interested in that, check that video out. And keeping in line with absolute classics that I've been wanting to play for years, I also played Silent Hill 2, both the original and the remake. Starting with the original Silent Hill 2 for the PlayStation 2. And this is simply the best horror game that I have had the pleasure of, or displeasure I guess, of playing. I don't get scared easily when watching horror movies or playing horror games, but playing through this game with headphones on alone in a dark room was truly haunting. Everything about this game is unsettling. The atmosphere is top tier, the sound design and the OST, when they decide to play which track, it all works harmoniously in such a perfect way. Even the elements that on paper could be seen as objective flaws, if that's even a real thing, the combat isn't that great. The controls can be a little janky at times. The voice acting feels strangely disconnected, like the characters aren't actually talking to each other. But all of those things, all of those weird kinks that the game might have, it all just adds to this experience in such a meaningful way. Silent Hill 2 just is that game, where everything works together to create one of the strongest experiences that you can have. And that's not even mentioning the narrative. I don't want to say too much about it, considering that unraveling the plot is one of the main draws here, but this story fucks you up. Every character feels so human and real. It's such a perfect psychological exploration of the human psyche, what loss or guilt can do to someone. And it's not just the narrative either, but the way that the game tells you this narrative. Yeah, it has traditional cutscenes and dialogue and everything, but there is so much more to the story that you can find in the environment, things that you'll only notice on repeated playthroughs. The way that the game handles different endings as well, by closely monitoring how you as the player behave. They look at how you interact with enemies, how you interact with healing items and NPCs, and all of that has an influence on which ending you will get. I just adore this game. I do want to mention some negatives though, because I've been praising it quite a bit, and I guess I should be fair. Some bosses are a little bit lackluster, and some boss arenas are also a tiny bit annoying. They fit the vibe and the atmosphere perfectly, but if you're fighting a boss, sometimes the rooms just don't feel fit for them. And I also had some trouble navigating the outside areas, as it wasn't really clear which building I could enter and which I couldn't, or it just wasn't always clear where to go. I get that that works in the narrative, you're supposed to feel lost in Silent Hill, but it kinda got to a point that I was like, where do I go? I just want to get to the next indoor areas, because those are of course the main attractions, and the outside areas just leave you wandering around, and I found that I just didn't enjoy those sections as much. But those are basically the only issues that somewhat bothered me during my playthrough, and compared to all the incredible things in this game, those are extremely minor, because for every criticism that I have, I can give a reason for why the game devs made that decision. I can see why it would strengthen the experience for some people, and just something that I personally didn't really vibe with. But with all of the other stuff, man, it all just hits so perfectly, and this is not only one of the best horror games that I played, but just one of the best games in general. And now for the remake. While I still personally prefer the original PS2 title, this game, this PS5 Bloober Team Silent Hill 2 remake, is without a doubt still one of the best horror games ever created, and probably one of the best remakes out there. There's not much to say about the story, as it is basically a one-to-one retelling of the original, but that's also not really a negative or a criticism, as it's just making the story more accessible for newer players. Almost everything is kept intact here, and while the new voice performances do give it a different feel, kind of getting rid of that disconnected feeling of the original, all of the characters and their voice actors still nail their role, and the facial expressions also add an extra layer to the moments without dialogue. If we're talking gameplay though, this game did really focus on turning Silent Hill 2 into more of a video game. If that even makes sense. The combat and the bosses have a lot more mechanical depth. The boss arenas are actual boss arenas now. The levels are a lot larger with a different layout. To give some examples, the apartments or the hospital was mostly made out of some straight hallways in the original, but here the layout is just a lot more interesting, and they also added a lot of completely new indoor locations. There are also some more enemy types and encounters, and the puzzles are completely reworked. Some of them take concepts from the OG, and others are just completely new, just more stuff like that. And while this is a welcome change for some things, like the bosses and just the combat in general, in other places it did hinder the experience in my opinion. I'm not sure if every new area was needed, and some puzzles take the concept of an existing puzzle that was tucked away in a corner somewhere, and then they blow it up to be the central focus of an entire area, which changes the entire vibe around them and makes everything feel a bit more video gamey. Making these puzzles so special and shining a spotlight on them kind of just took away from that special feeling that they gave me in the original. It is a bit of a double-sided coin though. Like, yeah, some puzzles might be a tiny bit worse, but for others they actually integrated elements of the narrative into them, which makes them far superior in this version. Another thing is that Silent Hill 2 was never about the combat, so I'm not really a fan of the several combat challenge rooms that the remake added. The combat is a lot better now, but making it a focal point wasn't really necessary, but these are just smaller issues in the grander scheme of things, and definitely more of a personal point. This is also why I still prefer the original, as it's more of this strange mind-bending experience, while the remake takes that experience and it translates it into a more accessible game. And that's completely fine. More people need to experience Silent Hill 2, and even if I prefer the original, I still really adore this remake, and I have no trouble recommending it. If you have the option to play the original, then you definitely should, but you should also play the remake afterwards. And if you don't have that option, like, I get it, emulation isn't that hard, but it's still a bit more of a hassle compared to just booting up a game. And in that case, I would tell you to just play the remake and experience this, because for the most part, and for the parts where it counts, this remake just really gets Silent Hill 2. The original game is also just an experience that's open for different interpretations, so for some sections the developers did change the presentation quite a bit, but I don't think that's objectively a bad thing at all. This new creative vision makes for some interesting alterations. Sometimes it might not hit the same highs, but at other points it surpasses them in my opinion, all the while still being true to the spirit of the original. It delivers that same narrative, the same message, and it aims for your feelings in the same way. And to me, that is the most important thing for any remake to do. Because how can you reintroduce a game to a new audience through a remake if you're not even gonna stay true to the original? And next I played the Metal Gear Solid games. These are also games that I've been wanting to play for years, and while I could always emulate them, I'm just someone who likes ease of access, so having this collection for PS5 is kind of just what gave me that push to finally check these games out. Starting with the original Metal Gear from 1987. A lot of people would tell you to just skip the originals and start with Metal Gear Solid, and I can kinda see why, as these games didn't age that well, and outside of providing some extra context, it's not really needed either. But I'm just someone who is for some reason obsessed with playing everything in order, plus you can also beat this game in a couple of hours, so I thought, why not? but this is a pretty basic 2D stealth infiltration game, but it does already play around with some cool mechanics, like the cardboard box to avoid cameras, the different items like the keycards and the disguises, or the way that the radio structures this game by contextualizing tutorials and also telling you a narrative. This narrative is very basic, but there is this one twist at the end with Big Boss that I really didn't expect, and I love how it was executed by using these radio calls. So I am happy that I played this game, and it had some really cool elements. But that being said, it also had some annoyances, because I don't really see how you could enjoy this game without a guide, unless you're willing to play this game for many hours, so you can try out everything and then hopefully make some progress. It's extremely cryptic, and it doesn't really tell you anything about where to go or how to get there. That being said though, this game is pretty old, so I definitely appreciate it for what it did at the time, and it was still a good time, it was still interesting to play through. And Metal Gear 2 is basically a step up from that original game in every single way, besides for maybe the backtracking being a bit more annoying as the areas are now bigger. But where I thought that the first game was an interesting experience, I think that the second game is genuinely an experience that I enjoyed. Not that I didn't enjoy the first game, but I feel like you get what I mean. It still has some jank and it hasn't aged perfectly, but it's definitely worth playing, because it has some really fun stealth mechanics, and it also has some really creative bosses that makes perfect use of this game's structure of only loading one screen at a time. It also has a surprisingly good story, like the stuff with Grey Fox and especially Big Boss, and the exploration of their view on war was a much deeper narrative than I expected going into this after the first one. I guess I should have known though, considering that it's Kojima and Metal Gear, but as someone who hasn't played any of the Metal Gear Solid games at this point, it made me extremely excited to continue the franchise. This to me just felt like the perfect prelude, the perfect way to ease me into the franchise, ease me into this world, get me familiar with some mechanics and characters before we would be thrown into the main event, let's say. Which then brings me to Metal Gear Solid. And this game honestly really surprised me with how cohesive it feels to what came before. I thought there would be a bigger disconnect, but these games really feel like a natural evolution, both in the gameplay and in the story. There is some jank left in the controls, especially in the close quarter combat and in some boss fights, but overall this game was really fun to play. Maybe some of the jank is caused by the transition to 3D, but I feel like it's natural for a game like this to feel at least a little aged when it's literally 25 years old. It's honestly impressive that it aged this well, all things considered. The bosses especially being a highlight with how creative some of them are. I had no idea that this series was so focused on its boss fights. I knew about Psychomantis, but he's one of the 10 boss fights in this game, and each of them are extremely fun, creative, and satisfying to figure out and defeat. I also really like the improved level design and structure of the entire thing. In the originals, I felt like I needed a guide to get anywhere, and the backtracking would often be tedious, but this game is a lot more streamlined and linear while still being open and giving you options. But the story and the characters are the main reason of why I got into this franchise. I feel like it is for most people. Kojima is very well known for his batshit insane, but also thought-provoking and just overall well-written narratives, and this game is no exception. I was surprised with how much story Metal Gear 2 had, but Metal Gear Solid is really where the storytelling is brought to another level. They really flesh out all of these characters, with some returning ones from Metal Gear, but also plenty of new faces. And despite their crazy concepts, like clones or cyborg ninjas, they all feel really grounded in this world. I don't think the story was anything too insane or mind-blowing, but it was really solid, and I just had a really good time with it. I really enjoyed the story of Snake, Liquid, Otacon, and some of the bosses that each carried narrative and thematic weight. Especially now, after playing Metal Gear Solid 2, I look back on this game very fondly, as it's just a fantastic start for so many incredible plotlines. Which then brings me to Metal Gear Solid 2. And I honestly don't know what I can say about this game that hasn't been said yet. I always try to avoid setting expectations for anything, as they can sometimes affect my experience without that being the intention, but it is very hard to go into this game without them. This game is often praised as one of the best games out there, and after playing it, I kind of just have to agree with that sentiment. From a gameplay standpoint, this just felt like the culmination of everything that came before. The foundation was there with Metal Gear, and Metal Gear Solid brought it to a 3D environment. And now Metal Gear Solid 2 is here to refine it. You have so many possibilities, the map is open but streamlined, and there are so many mechanics that the game doesn't even tell you about, which makes it so satisfying to just try stuff, from hiding bodies to upgrading your grip. I know that the following titles supposedly improve on the gameplay even more, but 2 is the last one that I played for now, so I can't say much more about that yet. And just like the gameplay, the story is another thing that just keeps getting better with every entry somehow. It's really hard to talk about this game without spoilers, but this is a narrative that constantly had me engaged, especially after playing all of the games that came before it, because it uses everything that came before it, and it uses it to its fullest. The game perfectly knows how to play with your feelings and expectations by referencing previous plotlines. They will draw parallels, they will drop hints, and all of them will keep you guessing at what is really going on. And the final few hours are like nothing that I've seen before. Massive plot twists that recontextualize everything that came before, and the philosophical questions that I asked back in 2001 are still extremely relevant today in 2025. There are so many layers to this narrative on a meta level as well, and it plays around with the fact that this is a Metal Gear game. I said earlier that it's hard to not have expectations for this game, but honestly, having expectations turned out pretty well, as the game is all about defying those. That's all I'm gonna say about it though, because like, as I said, what can I possibly say about Metal Gear Solid 2 that someone else hasn't said way better? Alright gamers, let's actually get real for a second here, because for years I had to listen to so many negative opinions on this game. Leading up to this remaster collection, so many people would say that the Apollo Justice trilogy in Ace Attorney is mid. People were saying that it was bad, and well, I'm here to say that you're all wrong, because Your Honor, it is peak. And I'm very happy that this collection made more people realize how good these games are, and people are now finally being positive about Ace Attorney 4, 5, and 6. This trilogy is of course a sequel trilogy to the original 3 Ace Attorney games, and they mostly follow the journey of Apollo Justice. The trilogy starts off with Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, also known as Ace Attorney 4, and this was an incredible breath of fresh air for the series. The new characters are really fun, and I'm glad with how different they feel from the original trilogy cast. They're genuinely trying something new here, and it works really well. I adore Apollo as a new protagonist, and compared to Phoenix, he's also a lot more critical and serious, caring more about the facts of the case and often reacting sarcastically to all of the weird characters and events that we're used to from the series, which is very entertaining. He also still has a lot to learn, but he fights to earn his own spotlight, which doesn't only work well within the plotline, but it also works well on a meta-narrative, as he of course needs to prove himself to the fans of the series. Then there's also Trucy, the new assistant, who is fucking awesome. I adore this character so much. She is just such an amazing presence on screen, both through her radiant positive energy and through her support for the rest of the cast despite what she's been through. Even Phoenix, who is kind of a controversial inclusion in this game for many, was handled really well in my opinion. He can kind of come across like a cryptic asshole in this game, but I just enjoyed that, especially because this makes for a really interesting dynamic between him and Apollo. It's not just the classic mentor and student relationship, but there's some friction here which makes it all the more interesting. And this is also the first time that we're seeing Phoenix from the eyes of someone else. We're used to hearing his goofy inner monologues, but to others, he is this legendary lawyer, and seeing him from this perspective was really interesting. You never really know what he's thinking or what he's planning, and the main narrative of this game is centered around what happened to him in the time jump between trilogies. He lost his badge, he has a daughter now, and he's not really hiding the fact that he's up to something. You are playing as Apollo, and it is Apollo's game, but Phoenix plays a crucial role as the situation surrounding him unveils a bigger issue with the current law system. This game is all about the definition of the law and how the system might be outdated with the extreme focus on evidence, which is honestly a genius idea to kick off a new trilogy. We've always been dealing with corrupt prosecutors, and this just takes that a step further, all the while passing the torch from the previous protagonist to the next. I also really like how focused this game is, as every chapter is connected to this overarching narrative and the character growth of Apollo. Of course, the previous games also had overarching narratives, but those could often feel a bit episodic at times. Well, this game is very much trying to tell you one single cohesive story. My only criticism of this game would really be some parts of the third case, because while that case is still really enjoyable, some twists in there just felt a bit cheap, and at points it was just kind of annoying to get through. But that's literally the only thing holding it back. Other than that, this game is incredibly consistent, and it became a favorite entry in the franchise, with the opening and closing chapters being some of the best in the series. It has my favorite main cast with Apollo, Trucy, and Phoenix. The single chapter witnesses are really fun. I loved the mysteries. Emma is also probably my favorite detective in the series, and while the prosecutor might not be my #1 personal favorite, I still really enjoyed his role in the story, as he's not just about winning the case, and outside of the courtroom he's friends with Apollo, which is actually a fun dynamic. Which then brings us to Ace Attorney 5, Dual Destinies. And as a sequel to Apollo Justice, this game can be kind of disappointing at first. It still follows up on the narrative thread of the outdated law system, now referred to as the Dark Age of the Law, but because Ace Attorney 4 wasn't that well received at the time, the game kinda backpedaled and put Phoenix back in the spotlight. Apollo is still a main character, but now he's just that, a main character, not the main character, having to share the spotlight not only with Phoenix, but also with another new main character in Athena Sykes. And because there are so many main characters in this game, the sidecast was completely sidelined. It's nice that Pearl came back, and I'm happy that Trucy was there, but I can't say much outside of yeah, they were there. But thankfully the game does make up for it in some other aspects. Athena is a fantastic addition to the cast, and I'm surprised with how much I liked her. The way that her backstory played into the new prosecutor Blackwell and the new detective Bobby was also genuinely incredible. Their story is the main focus of the narrative, and while it's not what I expected after Ace Attorney 4, I really loved this story, and similarly to Ace Attorney 4, it's also extremely cohesive. Apollo, of course, still has a major role to play in the story, of course, as he's a bit more experienced as a lawyer now, and he's also the one training Athena, with their dynamic being another highlight for me. But he also has a bit more of a personal plotline, which causes him to stray from the path that Phoenix has put him on, as he goes on a journey to find his own justice within this dark age. I would have preferred if that was it though, but they also made Phoenix a main character again, even if his role in the story didn't really require that. This is very much an Athena and Apollo game that's disguised as a Phoenix game, which would be fine, I guess, but because he is a main character, he is also the playable character in most cases, even if the story isn't really about him at all. But I can't be too harsh, because I feel like the game was still able to tell the story that it wanted to tell. The story of Blackwell, Apollo, and Athena is incredible, and while its place in the trilogy is a tiny bit awkward with all of these protagonists, it is a fantastic story in its own right. Oh yeah, and this is also the first Ace Attorney game that went 3D, which is pretty cool. The new mechanics are really fun, especially Athena's gimmick, and there are a lot of really nice quality of life additions. But for some reason, the game is very handholdy, and the investigations have been streamlined a lot, which was kind of disappointing. All in all though, the good easily outweighs the bad in my opinion, and I had a great time with this game. But Ace Attorney 6, Spirit of Justice, is a bit of a mixed bag for me. There is a lot that I love here, but there's also a lot of stuff that I'm personally not really a fan of. The game has some incredible cases, some really fun characters, a great overarching story, and it fixes some of the issues that I had with 5, as the investigations are once again a lot more open, and we even get a chapter focused on Trucy, and Emma, the detective from Ace Attorney 4, who was absent in 5, is back for this game as well. We also get introduced to a second main setting for the series in Quarry. This is a place that has been mentioned many times, but this is the first time that we're actually there. And this was really interesting. The world building is really solid, and the law system there is beyond messed up, which makes for a great thematic follow-up from the previous games. Phoenix is once again a main character, but this time it actually makes sense, because he is the one traveling to Quarry to meet up with Maya, and it was incredible to see them reunite again after all of this time. But despite the Maya Maya and Phoenix stuff, this is still a game in the Apollo Justice trilogy, so the main focus of the narrative still lies with him, as he is also closely related to both Kurian and the main prosecutor of this game, with his plotline actually giving him a lot of character development that brings his arc over these past 3 games to a very satisfying conclusion for me. But with all of those positives, it is still true that this game is a bit of a mixed bag for me, mostly because of the main prosecutor, Nayuta. I still enjoyed this game, but my enjoyment was extremely heavily carried by literally everything else. The prosecutor always plays a massive role in every Ace Attorney game, and this game is no exception. But I just didn't really like Nayuta. Prosecutors always have their running gags, and his sense of humor just didn't exactly line up with mine. Because of that, this is also very much a personal thing, and I really wish that I liked him more, because everything else in this game is so fucking good that this could have easily been like a top 3 Ace Attorney game for me. Because his character arc itself is also really good, it's just sad that the game keeps basically all of it for the final case, and even then, it's only in the second half of that case, and while his arc is there, he also kinda gets sidelined by the main villain or the final mastermind, to say it like that. A lot of my issues with this game basically just lie with him. It's also a shame that Athena got like 0 plot relevance in this title, even if her arc is clearly still ongoing. It's fun whenever she was on screen and she did have a fun case, but it very much felt like, oh fuck, we need Athena in this game, she's the main character, let's just make up this little side story for her and we turn it into chapter 4. Because chapter 4 is her chapter, but it feels so disconnected from the rest of the plots that it feels more like a DLC case. I don't mind it as much though, because it was a fun chapter, and Ace Attorney 5 was Athena's game just as much as it was Apollo's, and it's also because they kind of put her to the side that we managed to get more room for characters like Phoenix, Maya, and especially Apollo. The characters that probably needed it the most, since we're bringing back Maya and we're closing off this trilogy. I feel like it just makes sense for what this game wanted to do. Hopefully this is the last game that tries to juggle 3 characters though. All in all, I feel like this trilogy can be a bit messy at times, but despite that, all 3 games managed to tell a great story that had me hooked. They had a thematic through line, the characters had satisfying developments, and I just had a great time with this collection. I adore this cast, I love their interactions, their personalities, and character is at the heart of Ace Attorney. I've always liked this franchise, as I did really enjoy the original trilogy, but playing through these 3 games back to back over the course of 2024 really made me connect with it on a deeper level. It doesn't only introduce all of these new cast members, but it also builds on what came before in a satisfying way, which doesn't only make me love the Apollo Justice trilogy, but it makes me love the old games even more in retrospect. I'm genuinely just so happy that these games are finally available on modern platforms for everyone to enjoy, and since I'm fully caught up to the mainline games now, I'm finally playing the spin-offs, which I have heard fantastic things about, so I'm extremely excited, and I'm definitely gonna talk about them in my video for next year. But I'm bringing this up because I just hope that those spin-offs can keep me busy until they announce Ace Attorney 7. Please, Capcom. It's been so long. I played these games this year. For me, it hasn't been that long. I can't imagine what it's like for the people that played these when they released. Well, that aside, I miss these games. I miss the mainline titles. I miss the gang. I need Ace Attorney 7. And I need it to be an Athena game. Capcom, make it happen, please. Metaphor ReFantazio is a game that I was really excited for, as it's the new IP from the creator of Persona 345, Catherine, and SMT3 Nocturne. And this is honestly a really special experience, as it tells such an important message about the importance of fantasy and fiction. And it tells you this message in such a poignant way, with many of the characters and story arcs being driven by this. The main cast is genuinely fantastic, and I got incredibly attached to them, with many of their best moments also being highlights of the narrative for me. Even the side characters each had their own spotlight, and Louise as the villain was absolutely impeccable. All of this is also really helped by the perfect performances of the voice actors. I loved going on this journey with this cast, and the game does an incredible job at making you feel like you're on this grand adventure in the same way that I love from my favorite classic JRPGs. The narrative itself is also very strong, with some interesting twists and ideas, even if some of them did end up feeling them kind of predictable in my opinion, and some of them could have been explored a bit further. But that being said, there were also many plot twists that completely caught me off guard and that I absolutely loved. One flaw with the game is the pacing though, in my opinion, because while it was really solid for most of it, like this game has an incredibly strong start that carries through like the first 50 to 60 hours of this game, but then near the end it really fell off in my opinion. At a certain point there are massive plot events happening back to back to back, but then suddenly right before the ending you have this really lengthy 10 to 15 hour section with like zero plot progression, and that just killed all momentum for me. Thankfully, the ending itself is absolutely phenomenal, but the final month is definitely the reason that I put the game down for a little bit. But again, it really manages to pull itself together in the end and end on an extremely satisfying and cohesive note. Another problem that I personally had with the game is that I wasn't that into the dungeon gameplay. There are some really interesting dungeons in this game, but others do kind of drag on for a bit too long. The reason for that is just that they are too long, or because they just weren't that interesting and they could have had some more interesting layouts or maybe some more unique mechanics to spice things up every now and then. Another point, which is definitely a very personal thing, is that I didn't really vibe with the archetype system, because every single time I opened that menu I just got extremely overwhelmed. There are so many different archetypes and the game really needs you to commit. If you want to level a certain archetype, you gotta commit to that because you can't get your XP back. And if you then end up not enjoying that archetype, well, too bad, you should have grinded for a different one, or you can grind for a different one now. But that made the game feel very grindy, and it kind of made me scared of committing to a certain path for a character. I feel like I was definitely overthinking it, but there was so much in that menu that I didn't know what to level on who and all of those things that it kinda just got to the point that my enjoyment plummeted once I opened that menu. The combat itself was peak though, don't get me wrong. I absolutely love press turns, I love synergy skills, and the action combat was really fun with the classes that had fun weapons. I did not really like the mage weapon, which really bothered me because I wanted to play as the mage, but that's a little side note, I guess. This might look like a lot of negativity for a mini review like this, but I wouldn't be making these arguments and I wouldn't be criticizing this game like this if I didn't care for it. I absolutely fell in love with this game for the story and the characters and the message that it was trying to tell. I think the art direction is fucking beautiful, I think the OST is fantastic. I love almost everything about this game, but there are those things that are just holding it back for me personally, and that's why I just wanted to highlight them. I'm currently also in the middle of working on a more in-depth review for Metaphor ReFantazio, so if you're interested in that and if you want to hear me elaborate on the points that I made just now, be sure to check out my channel. Depending on when you're watching this, the video might already be out, and if not, why not subscribe so you'll see the video pop up in your subscription feeds, hopefully very soon. Following up on the game that I talked about earlier in the video, I also played Control in 2024, which is set in the same universe as Alan Wake. And Control is a super fun third-person shooter that deals with some super intriguing concepts set within a super interesting world, but the story sadly doesn't take full use of that world, in my opinion. The narrative is set up in a really interesting way. It doesn't really tell you anything and it feels like they're dropping you in the middle of a story. Uncovering this narrative then was also really fun, because at the start you genuinely just have no idea what's going on, but the game is using that to its advantage. The entirety of this game is set in one location, the Bureau, and this location has a lot of reality-bending elements to it that make it feel really mysterious and unreal, but the environment design and just the story does a fantastic job at making it feel grounded despite that. The Bureau is an awesome concept and the lore is really in-depth. But while the story is interesting and while it does a good job at introducing us to the world of Control, I don't really care that much about the narrative itself, and outside of the opening section, it can also feel a bit messy at times. Like, I really like the main character and I like the plot surrounding her. I also like the plot on paper, but it doesn't really live up to the world around it, and it ends up being overshadowed by it. A big reason for this is probably the lower budget that this game had, as the presentation of a lot of moments can dampen the impact that it has. Not a lot of scenes are mocapped, and it shows. The ending suffers the most from this though, as the game kind of just ends. but at least the DLC included in this Ultimate Edition does make up for that by adding a really solid epilogue and a genuinely fantastic conclusion for this chapter of the story. But compared to Alan Wake, where the gameplay was one of my main issues, that is just not a problem in Control, as the gameplay is absolutely incredible. Combining the different powers with the different guns on all of the different enemy types was so much fun, and this game just felt really good to play. The environments are fun and often bring the best out of every mechanic, as you're completely destroying everything around you by flying around, picking up objects and throwing them at the enemies. If I do have to mention a single criticism about the gameplay though, it's that the RPG mechanics often don't really add that much to the game. Some of the perks and upgrades are cool, but others just feel kind of useless, and they feel like they were put into the game because RPGs are popular, not because these mechanics belong here. In general, this game is really awesome though. The world is genuinely incredible, the story is interesting, the combat is extremely satisfying, and while, yeah, it does have some problems, this game easily kept me entertained for the 30-ish hours that it took me to get the platinum. And those are basically my main 2024 gaming experiences that I want to talk about. But that's also not it for this video, as you can see in the timestamps, because there are some games that I played and that I have something to say about, but not really enough for me to write a little script about them. Let's call it a little bonus round, a lightning round, and I'm just gonna go off the cuff, quick recommendations, quick talking about the experiences I had, because I want to mention these games, but as I said, I don't really have enough to say about them, I feel like. Starting with The Quarry, which is a game from the Until Dawn developers, and as a game it's also extremely similar. Think a cliché horror movie, but you get to make the decisions. You get to decide which characters split up, which ones stay together, and then you'll see which one of them dies, and if you're lucky, all of them will survive. I played it with some friends, and it was just really fun. The game has this built-in function where you can all choose a character to control, and you basically just hand each other the controller whenever another character becomes playable. You make the decisions together. It's just a fun game. I feel like the game would even be fun to play alone, but I played it with friends, added this extra layer of fun to it, screaming at each other when they make the wrong decisions, especially when they kill your character, because that is a thing that can happen. Someone can make a decision, and then because of the butterfly effect, your character can die. So it's fun, chaotic fun. I don't think the game is as fun as Until Dawn. I don't think the story is as solid and the characters aren't as memorable, but it's just a good time, so I wanted to give it a little shout out. The next game on this short list is the expansion for Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torna, the Golden Country. And I would say that this is a pretty good expansion, but it's also nothing too special. It's this bite-sized Xenoblade experience coming in at around 10 to 15 hours maybe, and it's good for what it is. Like, the combat has been simplified a lot from base game, making it a lot more faster paced, and while I do prefer the combat system of the original, I get why they changed it, because this is so much shorter of a game, this is so much smaller of a game, so a faster paced system would work better here. It's a fun system though, don't get me wrong. The characters are also pretty good, they're probably the highlight of this expansion. This is a prequel to the base game. Some characters are returning, some characters are new, and they're all pretty good. They often build on what comes in the base game. Like, I feel like it is a pretty good expansion in the way that it expands on Xenoblade 2 and its lore and its world building. So it's good in all of those aspects. While I'm talking about positives, the ending is also incredible and probably like another highlight of this expansion. But the reason that I'm not more positive about this, I guess, or that I'm not more excited talking about this, is because this game does drag quite a bit. I said earlier that the game is like 10 to 15 hours long, and half of that will be spent on side quests, because the game forces you to do side quests to level something called a community level. And while the idea is good and I don't mind it being there, the fact that they made it mandatory is the problem with it. I understand why they did it, because they wanted you to care about the community and about the world here, but just the fact that you're making these side quests mandatory does really hurt this game and really hurts the pacing. I feel like I would have enjoyed this game a lot more if they made that system optional. Like, keep the system, sure, but maybe give me more reason to interact with it without just forcing me to do it. Another game that I played this year is Pokémon Alpha Sapphire, a game that I really enjoyed, but that I don't have that much to say about because it is just a Pokémon game. isn't it? The base game itself, the main game, was really solid. It was basically just the Pokemon formula perfected, in my opinion, but it didn't really have anything that stood out to me either. I just played it, I got to the credits, and I was like, oh, this was fun, really, really good Pokemon game. But then someone told me to do the post-game episode Delta, I think. I may be very wrong with that name, but that's what we're gonna go with. And this post-game thing was fucking incredible. It had some super hype moments, something that I really didn't expect from a Pokemon game, but I loved it. I loved the story of this post-game episode. I had so much fun with it. That honestly just elevated the whole game for me. It basically made me go from, this was a very, very good Pokemon game, I don't know if it's my number one, but it's up there, but the post-game easily made it my favorite one. I loved my time with this game, but again, it's a Pokemon game, I don't have that much to say about it. Up next, Resident Evil Revelations. It's one of those spin-offs. It's not as good as the mainline titles, but I wouldn't say that it's bad either. And this is an episodic game, which actually worked out a lot better than I expected, because Resident Evil has been kind of divided as a franchise, with 1, 2, and 3 being very survival horror, and 4, 5, and 6 being more action third-person shooter games. And then Resident Evil Revelations comes in and tries to combine the two. Some chapters are focused on the survival horror aspect, where you play as Jill, and in the other chapters you play as Chris, and he's doing the more action-heavy stuff. Both characters are part of one bigger narrative though, which I thought was pretty interesting. Like, the story isn't anything too insane, too outstanding, and the gameplay also isn't really the best that the series has to offer, but it is still good fun. I just thought that the game was pretty good. Nothing too outstanding, but also definitely not bad. This one might be a bit weird than putting it in the quick highlights section, but I played Shadow of the Erdtree, and Shadow of the Erdtree is both Elden Ring at its best, but I would also say that it's Elden Ring at its worst. For the good parts, I think it has some phenomenal bosses. I think it has a really, really good story with some very interesting NPC characters. I also think that a lot of the areas look absolutely beautiful, and the legacy dungeons within them are some of the best in the game. But it also has a lot of issues, such as the reused bosses in the open world being very noticeable, and it was actually done in a way that it kind of took me out of the experience and made me less immersed. Also, a lot of areas need to be accessed in very specific ways by doing very specific actions, which is incredible if it works organically. If you just randomly stumble upon this entrance to a cave and you go through it and then boom, you're in this entirely new area, but because it's so specific, it's very hard to make those things happen organically. I also think the Shadow Tree fragments are a bit weird because they make sense from a game design standpoint, but at the same time, they make the difficulty feel really artificial, and that's kind of the last thing you want from a Souls game, especially when a lot of the bosses do feel kind of bullshitty, I guess. I don't like using that word, but sometimes they just spam so many attacks and your screen is so full of shit that I didn't really enjoy them. In general, I would say that I enjoyed it, but not as much as the main game. SMT5 Vengeance, another weird one to put on the quick lightning round list because I mostly talk about JRPGs. I love Atlas JRPG. Why do I not have more to say about this? Well, that's because I didn't play the Vengeance route. The reason for that being, I never owned the game on Switch because I just knew that at some point they would port it to other platforms, and I just prefer playing it in HD at a stable frame rate. I waited for this release, and then I played the original route. I could have just done the Vengeance route, but I thought the Vengeance route is definitely gonna be an upgrade. Everyone is saying that the base game of SMT5 is a bit undercooked, and from what I've heard, Vengeance is a lot better. So I thought, why would I play Vengeance first? Because then I gotta return to the game with a worse storyline. So I thought, I'll just do the Canon of Creation first, and then when I replay it eventually, I'll do the Canon of Vengeance route. And I'm basically just here to say that people were correct. I think that the Canon of Creation route is kind of boring. It has a lot of really, really good concepts and a lot of interesting characters and a really interesting world, but the game doesn't do anything with it. These characters don't go anywhere. Their development feels really stupid. Just nothing of the storyline goes anywhere, and I just didn't really enjoy it. But the gameplay, however, was absolutely fantastic. I adored the combat system in this game. I thought the world exploration was really fun. From a gameplay perspective, this game is absolutely incredible, but the story was really, really boring. I also played Splatoon 3. I'm kind of just including this at this point because I mentioned Splatoon in every single one of these videos, and I want to keep up the tradition. I played Splatoon 3 this year, and I loved it. It was so much fun. It's easily my favorite Splatoon game. I think that the difficulty level was just right. It was challenging, but it wasn't annoyingly challenging. All of the levels were creative, they were fun. The story was also surprisingly good with a really cool final boss. I also really like the music. The multiplayer is good. This is like the only Splatoon game that I really got into the multiplayer, which was fun. I liked it. I also played the DLC though, which is like a roguelike, and I didn't like that. I thought it was very repetitive and kind of boring. But the story was cool, so that's something. I did beat it. It was okay. Yeah, that's basically it. Next up though, I have the game of the year of 2024. And also, out of the new releases, my favorite game that released this year, Astro Bot. Because I think that this game is just pure fun and whimsy that they somehow were able to compress into a disc and ship for the PS5. I don't know how they did it. This game is just pure joy, and I loved it. But that's also why I don't have that much to say about it. Like, the game is fun, the game is incredible, the game is beautiful, it's fun. I'm kind of running out of words because that's just what it is. The game is extremely creative. Every level had a different gimmick. I loved all the gimmicks. I loved the little cameo bots. I loved that they paid tribute to some very well-known series, but also to some really deep cuts. This game is just fun. I like all the free content updates that they're doing. I hope they do a paid DLC at some point because I would love to have like another galaxy or whatever, but maybe I'm getting a bit greedy now. I just want more of this game because it was so fun. Astro Bot is fun. Absolute cinema. Game of the year. Loved every second of it. And then the final game of today is The Last Guardian. This is honestly just such a special game, and I have no idea how they managed to get Trico, the creature, to feel so real. The way that he would just walk off, the way that he would just stop and stare at that spot on the wall. I have 2 dogs myself, and I could see them in this game, kind of. It was honestly insane how real this creature felt, and because of that, the bonds that I had with Trico also felt really real, and the game is not afraid to use that in an emotional way. Like, yeah, at points, the dog doesn't exactly do what you ask it, and at points you get lost in this world, but that's just kind of part of it. You can't bend this game to your will. You need to be patient, and you need to look around the environment carefully. You need to be very careful about your inputs, and all of that just kind of clicked with me. I don't know, I felt like when something wrong happens with Trico, it never felt like the game not working as intended. It felt like I just used the wrong input, if that makes sense. And the way that your bond with this creature is also shown through gameplay, as at first you need to tell him every single thing that he has to do, and he sometimes just won't listen because he's a dog and he's not always gonna do what you want him to do. But throughout the game that changes, and in the end he does the right thing without you even telling him. You are on this journey together. I don't know, I don't have much to say about it outside of the fact that I just adored every second of my journey with Trico. And that was it. That was every game that I played in 2024 that I had something to say about. Thank you so much for watching up to this point in the video. If you did reach this far, maybe consider subscribing, leaving a like, leaving a comment. Let me know what you played this year. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my opinions. I know that you disagree with my Final Fantasy VII Rebirth opinion. It's okay. Let me know in the comments, and I'll be down there replying to you all. Let's have a conversation. It's also the beginning of 2025. I set myself this soft goal, kind of, to reach 1K sometime this year. So if you could help me reach that, that would be awesome. Yeah, this video was fun to make. I always like making these. The last few years I made 2 videos, one for new releases and one for backlog games, but this year I just thought, fuck it, I'll just throw everything together into one big 2024 retrospective, so people can just like have it on in the background while they play a game, or while they're driving, or while they're at work or something. I personally just like long videos like that, so I guess that's why my videos tend to be a bit longer. But yeah, I'm gonna end the video here. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.